would be great, yeah. So raise your hand and a microphone will come to you. Is that right?
Yes, I think.
In the meantime, feel free to...
I don't need a microphone.
Yeah, I don't have it running microphone.
Okay.
Okay, speak up.
Something that wouldn't be in your book, Dave, I'd like to get your take on. Although I went to the polls yesterday and voted, because there was a couple of good candidates, Charles Corbett being one of them right here, and unfortunately they lost. I'm not at all upset that Democrats did not go to the polls in New Jersey yesterday to say Corzine, because I think this party is long overdue for a message from its base, from working Democrats who will just vote for anything they put in front of us, blue dogs, whatever, in the name that is not a republic. What's your reaction to that?
Well, of course I agree with the sentiment and the need for the message. Sadly, as clear as that message may be in the election results in New Jersey and in my state, in Virginia, among other places, may not be clear to people like Rahm Emanuel, who can look at something black and see white. And the takeaway for them may be, these candidates were not bad enough. This was a response to our socialistic tendencies and our attempts to do things about health care and the environment, for God's sake. What business do we have monkeying around with such things? It's going to be safer for us to back off a little bit and be even worse than we are. I mean, the Democratic Party's worst members are its analysts, its strategists, these people who are paid big bucks to lose election after election by advising candidates to play it safe by getting worse, and to play it safe by trying to get some Republican voters rather than exciting some non-voters. And so if you want to get the message across that, hey, if you want to win elections, you've got to do something to excite people and turn out the people who might actually vote for you, and stop focusing on the people who are never going to vote for you no matter how much you kiss up to them. You can't just do that by voting or not voting. You have to do it by building media outlets that you use to state your message, by taking your message directly with nonviolent activism to the members, to your elected officials here and in Washington. If people are taking polls and sitting in offices and disrupting the day's work day after day, and getting that message in the media that they are going to hold people accountable in coming elections based on whether or not they come through on these issues, then you're getting the message out. As with anything, most of our work has to happen in between elections and apart from elections, although the threat tied to future elections can be a part of it. But I was, we had a candidate in Virginia who was absolutely awful. And then we had the Republican candidate who was absolutely awful. And you have a Republican candidate who's exposed as an insane right-wing fundamentalist Christianist, wrote a thesis in college that women shouldn't be working, it's destroying the nation, we shouldn't be allowing fornication and so forth. A raw vegetable could defeat that guy. Instead we get a Democratic candidate, and he can't do it, right? He says, oh, if they pass that public option, I'll opt out of it for Virginia. He says, I like guns as much as him. In fact, I want to let you have guns in bars now. He says, the environment's important, but it's not so important as to override anything else. This is a guy who goes out of his way to turn off anybody who might get excited about working for him. So what happens? The young people stay home, the Democratic voters stay home, and the Republican wins. The problem is that they won't interpret that the way I'm interpreting it, they will interpret it as, well, you know, he tried to look like a Republican, but he didn't really succeed. Right? That's how they're going to see it. And this is how the corporate media will interpret it. Those are their interests. They are talking about how these Democrats lost the independence. They're not talking about anybody who stayed home. They're not talking about young people. They're talking about these sacred independents who presumably go back and forth between candidates based on who's tougher on abortion or whatever, and how they went with the Republican because the Republican was better on the issues. That's the lesson they're taking away. And if you don't want them to take that lesson, you have to impose your message on them. You can't just expect them to get it. Yes, sir.
I'm with Veterans for Peace. Our
Good.
chapter president is Louise Leglin. She's a nurse from Korea. We took the name Thomas Paine chapter this last year. And we kind of believe that Duke Cunningham needs company. 8 of us have filed criminal complaints against Charlie Dent and Senator Specter. Obstruction of justice, dereliction of duty, seditious conspiracy, malfeasance. 8 of us went to the FBI, filed it up with charges to the Justice Department. I've been talking to Ron Fisher. I've exchanged dozens of letters with Noam Chomsky. Even he endorses this policy. We do it 3 people at a time, put it in black and white. We can give you a sample letter. We can give you the copies of the attachments. Ron Fisher is developing something like this for the robbery that Wall Street committed, so it'll be a 5th attachment. Bugliosi's documented the murder charges against Bush. Congress are accomplices to murder. There's no statute of limitations on this. Why not put it in black and white? Let's vote through the Justice Department. If nothing else, you'll have a written date-stamped document that you can introduce in a future litigation if they arrest you. Now, we've exchanged some thoughts on this. Can you share your ideas on this idea, on this concept?
Well, my first idea is to thank you for being with Veterans for Peace, with which I'm an associate member as well. I'm not a veteran, but it is one of the best organizations in the country on these issues, one of the most consistently principled and independent and free of corruption and courageous and willing to make sacrifices. There's probably not a better organization, although there are larger ones. Needless to say, I couldn't agree more that people need to be tried for their crimes, and there is probable cause to bring up most of these people on charges, and pushing it on the Justice Department is to be commended. There's nothing, there's no argument against doing that, and I've participated in protests where we've blocked the doors of the Justice Department. I would love to see a bigger such protest where we surround the Justice Department building in Washington, D.C. and don't let anybody out by car or by foot until they enforce our laws. In March, a lot of peace activists are going to be attempting to do what we ought to have done several years back already, as any civilized nation would have long since done, and that is shut Washington, D.C. down, not on a Saturday, not on one day, but endlessly. So be watching for announcements about this coming March, middle of the month, in Washington, D.C. But I will say, in terms of getting people prosecuted, there are other angles to be pursued, as you touched on when you mentioned Vince Bugliosi, whose strategy is to find a local or state prosecutor. And most of the crimes do have statutes of limitations. Only the crime where there's a dead body doesn't. So torture, when somebody lives, has a statute of limitations. Warrantless spying has a statute of limitations. Most crimes, it's 5 years. Torture, it's 8 years. And you can argue about where you have to start the clock. And you could conceivably get Congress to extend the statutes of limitations, as John Conyers proposed several months ago and hasn't lifted his little finger to do. But the fact is that on most of the crimes from the Bush-Cheney crime spree, the clock is rapidly ticking out, or has ticked out. But on crimes where there's a dead body, it never stops. You can get them at any point from here on out. And most of the crimes are crimes under Pennsylvania state law. And if you could find or persuade or elect a local or state prosecutor in Pennsylvania with some nerve and some decency and some ambition, you could go after warrantless spying. Most people in Pennsylvania have been spied on without a warrant. It is almost certainly illegal. It's illegal in most state laws. You could go after torture. It's assault and battery. You could go after all sorts of crimes. And under Vince Bugliosi's theory, you could go after sending troops to an illegal, unnecessary war as constituting their murder. And you could do that in any jurisdiction from which someone has been sent to die in that war. I think all of those things must be pursued, and foreign and international and civil angles must be pursued, and civil suits are progressing with some success against these people for crimes they haven't been indicted for. But the idea of why don't we vote through the Justice Department, I think has the potential to be a little bit misleading in that we can't unelect anybody at the Justice Department. We don't elect them in the first place. They don't work for us. We can't defund them. We can't take away their donors. We can't do much except change the discourse and the media conversation and potentially disrupt their daily lives with phone calls and emails and letters and faxes and protests. And I'm for all of that. But right down the street are a bunch of people who we do elect, who we can unelect, who we can much more easily disrupt their daily business lives, who we can influence through our local media and our local organizations, and who are supposed to represent us. And we're Congress members to demand that the Justice Department act. We're Congress to begin subpoenaing or impeaching anybody. We're Congress to make public more evidence of the crimes. Then we could force the Justice Department to act, and we could get some justice simply through the Congress directly. So I'm not sure that that's not the most likely angle of success. And the added benefit it has is that we may preserve and improve our chances of keeping a republic, as Benjamin Franklin warned we would have to do. Because if we ignore Congress because it's so hopeless, it's going to become more hopeless, and we're not going to have a representative republic at all, at which point lobbying the Justice Department becomes pointless as well. Yes?
The Spanish courts, the case that they have, I contacted the people in charge of the committee, got a response, much to my surprise, and asked if we could sign on. They're bringing it before the World Court. Is there any? He said that eventually they would ask for people's names, but just as a matter of showing support. Is there any way that we can do anything?
This is Judge Garzon's office you're talking about? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Well, I confess I was unaware of any plans to take anything to an international court. That's very interesting.
I thought that's what they were going. I thought that was the reason that they were.
Well, there is an effort to try 6 of our former top officials in a Spanish court. And that is to be applauded and encouraged, and we should be going to contacting the Spanish embassy and applauding them. We should be writing to Spanish newspapers and encouraging them and letting them know that Americans support this, that we aren't enforcing our own laws. We love the idea of them being willing to do it for us. And again, Italy has just convicted 23 of our criminals for kidnapping someone in their country for purposes of torturing him.
What will happen to
Italy will very likely ask that they be extradited to Italy, and our country will very likely tell them to go chain themselves, and those guys will not travel. But it will set a precedent, and we should be writing letters right now to Italian newspapers, thanking them, encouraging them, telling them that we applaud their efforts, and if the United States fails to extradite criminals as required by the Italian court, we want them to know about a new technique we've learned of called rendition. And we have addresses for these individuals here in the United States. And if they'd be interested in learning more about renditioning, they should contact the White House.
How do you get people to do anything? I can't anymore. I don't know what to do anymore. I used to fill buses to go to Washington, get people out on Penn's, out by the mall, and nobody wants to do anything anymore. One of the Washington things, I sent out a notice. I heard from one person. I said, I'll organize a bus if I hear from enough people. So I don't. I'm pretty hopeless. You're talking about. I mean, I don't know if I can stand to wait until after I'm dead to see something get better.
Well, I don't know if you can either, but I know that you've just coughed the germs of defeatism on a whole bunch of other people, and that's not helpful. I know that. I'm not unsympathetic. It's not that I don't understand. It's not that I'm not aware. But I don't find anything helpful about complaining. I am honored by the idea that I've got some sort of magical answer that's going to cheer you up. That's very flattering. I appreciate it.
I'm not expecting you to cheer me up. No, that's not going to happen. But
I know that's the thing. It's a very intense and intentional and persevering sort of defeatism, and a lot of it for people is just the accumulation of years and years of doing things and not having really succeeded in what you wanted yet. But for a lot of people, it's the belief that we did something in November that was supposed to transform the world, and it didn't. And I don't know if that plays into your thinking at all.
Well, that's what my article is about that I gave you. So, yeah.
Well, I would have
made
skipped.
it even more difficult, and I didn't know that it could get more depressing than the 8 years of Bush and Cheney. But that, he was not my candidate, but there was a bit of hope that things would have to get somewhat better, and then to see that all the policies continue and nothing get better.
Well, I would have skipped the hope and the expectation and the depression. I would have skipped that whole. In fact, I did skip that whole cycle. I can't take you back in time, but I think moving beyond it now might be easier if we all understood why next time we should skip it entirely. And elections alone have never changed anything, never will. If they did, they would be banned. And to expect them to is to ask to be disappointed. And then to expect the election of a president, not the first branch of our government, but the executive, to change everything. Well, if it did, that would be very, very bad news for the future of our country and the world. But to expect that it would, it adds a whole level of self-delusion and lack of history.
I had none of those expectations,
And-
not after doing this for the last 8 years. I had none of those expectations.
You had a bit of hope.
Just the tiny, that we wouldn't have to see Bush and Cheney's face every day.
Okay, well, I'm speaking in general terms. I'm exaggerating dramatically. You only had a little bit of hope. A lot of people had a great deal of hope. I'm suggesting that even the little bit should not have been there. And
You're right.
you know, to expect an election to change things, even a teeny little bit, change one teeny little itsy-bitsy thing, and to expect the election of a president to have that result, and to expect the election of this particular guy who never gave us any indication that he was on our side, it's sort of 3 levels of blindness and wishful thinking and sort of Rorschach test imagining. You know, a lot of people seriously argued to me, smart people, that the president was really better than how he was campaigning. You know, usually in the course of representative democracies around the world for a couple centuries, you're lucky if you can get a candidate to be as good as what they campaign on. They're going to be somewhat worse, and you're going to have to fight to get them to be just as good as their promises. Well, here we are with a significant number of Americans arguing that this president is going to be better than what he's promising. He's actually promising to be worse than what he's going to be. He's got a secret plan. It's 3-dimensional chess. You don't understand it. You're too stupid. You're not the president. He is. And, you know, we have this presidentialism, royalism trend that's grown since George Washington was president and grown dramatically in recent years. And we had a coup in 2000, and we had a coup in 2004, and we're going to act like we had a coup in 2008 because we're in that habit now. And we're going to sit back and see what our new, now benevolent dictator does to us. That's not what you do when you have an election. And, you know, we do all this busy work of registering people to vote and getting them to vote because we have to, when you ought to be registered to vote the same instant you're registered to go kill and die for the military. And it would be easier to understand where activism has to begin. It has to begin the night the election ends, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. You know, within that first day, we have Rahm Emanuel put in charge of the White House, right? I mean, some people wanted to give him a year. Some people wanted to give him 6 months. Some people wanted to give our new, shiny dictator a couple weeks. Just giving him a day ruined everything. So, you know, it's not that things aren't hard. It's not that we haven't been trying. It's not that people older than I with more experience hadn't been trying for decades before I was born, and they've still been trying up to this minute, and they're fed up and sick and disgusted and want to go to sleep. But if you're going to continue to work, which there is some possibility since you come to events like this one, right, that the really despondent people don't come out and whine, they just stay home, right? You guys are the people interested in doing things, right? So if you're going to do things, then we got to do the most strategic things we can. And a lot of activist organizations are telling you to call the White House and write the White House and lobby the president, and the president must do this and the president must do that. There is no possibility that you are going to influence the president. It is the most remote possibility imaginable. We have not tended to be able to influence presidents up until now. What is it that would have changed that? Right? And so think about what you can most usefully do and try to do it. Try to do it. How many people have heard of a guy named I.F. Stone? Right, very, very good reporter, muckraker, independent, unembedded, journalist for many decades, but during the Vietnam War, above all else, I think. Can I borrow that book for 1 second? This is something that I.F. Stone said. The only kinds of fights worth fighting are those you are going to lose. Because somebody has to fight them and lose, and lose, and lose, until someday somebody who believes as you do wins. In order for somebody to win an important major fight 100 years hence, a lot of other people have got to be willing, for the sheer fun and joy of it, to go right ahead and fight, knowing you're going to lose. You mustn't feel like a martyr. You've got to enjoy it. Now, we think of some of the things we're doing as short-term small things. We think of some of the things we're doing as undoing recent damage. We don't think of all of our causes as causes of the next century, right? But there's no guarantee that they aren't. A lot of what we're proposing, a lot of what I propose in my book, are radical changes that I wouldn't want to see attempted right now. We had a national convention to rewrite our Constitution right now without some significant reforms, at least in the process of how that's done, and we would have ExxonMobil writing our new Constitution, right? We have some broad visions for the distant future, and a lot of the things that we would love to see happen this week, may not happen for years or decades, or they may happen in 2 weeks. We don't know. We have to work as effectively as we can to try to make them happen. Don't take my word for it. Medical studies show that when you get together with your neighbors and your allies and you protest and you engage in civic resistance and action, it's good for your health. It's good for your health, right? Yeah, you don't have to, you're thinking, intelligent people working for things you care about. So when you don't get them, you get discouraged, and you analyze and you see why you haven't succeeded, and you get more discouraged. I'm not asking you to be blind or stupid. You have to look at where the problems are so that you can address them most effectively. But being discouraged, I don't think it has any appropriate place. It has nothing to do with how smart you are. It's a separate issue, right? Pessimism of the intellect, Antonio Gramsci said, optimism of the will. You have both at once, right? And we really have no right not to. I would encourage you to try some experiments. Try going for a week being an active, engaged citizen without thinking about the president. And try going for a week being an active, engaged citizen without thinking about whether you're going to succeed really soon or not, or things are gloomy or rosy. And see how, if at all, that activism is different in those mindsets. Anybody else? Yeah?
Why can't we use boycott? Everybody has the power to control this economy, and that power is right here. If we use an effective boycott against people that don't want to do the will of the people, or we hold our dollars, we don't spend our money, that would force them out of the box. Then they would have to engage us. Why isn't that used as an option? We're just going to say no. We've heard that term before. I'm just going to say no. I'm not going to go and put up a Christmas tree this year. I'm not going to buy Christmas gifts. I'm not going to do any of that. I don't even think I'm going to give to my church, because I'm going to withhold this until I see changes. And it's going to be tough. Some people are going to get hurt. It could drastically affect this economy. But at least some people would get up and start to talk. Because now the power of the people is right here, right in their back pocket.
I would encourage you to go announce a boycott of Franklin Mills Mall on Black Friday and accomplish two things with it, in that you could protest the Army Experience Center's presence there at the same time. We were talking earlier about election results and how we might see them, but how somebody else might see them. If you don't buy a Christmas tree, assuming somebody hears about that, they're going to interpret that how they want to interpret that. So if you're going to have an action, you have to have a means of getting out your message of what it was for, what it's meant for, if it's not crystal clear to everyone. Right? If you're sitting at a lunch counter while they pour ketchup on your head and call you a nigger, it's clear what you're doing there. You're trying to get the right to eat at the lunch counter. But if you refrain from buying a Christmas tree, you need some mechanism for explaining to the world why you refrained from buying the Christmas tree. Nobody knows. Fox News is going to say there's a war on Christmas. Right? So the reason that boycotts aren't used more, they're used sometimes. We just got, cost Glenn Beck most of his advertisers on Fox News, but we didn't get rid of Glenn Beck because he's a political agenda for them. He's not just a generator of advertising. Boycotts aren't used more because they're very, 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 very difficult. You think of how difficult it is to move a Congress member, or how difficult it is to get the Army Experience Center shut down, or even how difficult it is to move a senator or a president, to influence one corporation through a boycott, much less the entire country through a boycott, and to have the organization to do that, and the funding to do that, and the means of avoiding the generating of enemies in the process who you're hurting economically, is a massive, massive undertaking. Now, I'm in favor of such a thing if we could do it, and do it quickly, and do it effectively. I'm in favor of shutting down the city of Washington with the presence of 1 million people willing to put their bodies in the streets. I'm in favor of big projects that I've been trying for years and haven't got off the ground yet. So it's not that I'm against it, but if you're going to list things in order of ease with which we might get them off the ground, a general mass boycott of the entire economy has got to be somewhere near the very bottom. It's not an easy thing.
Why do the French are able to do it? Why are they as a
Because they have a labor movement that is not bought and paid for and absolutely across the board subservient to a political party in their government. The little fragment of a labor movement that we have left, which wouldn't compare to the French labor movement anyway, will not defy the Democratic Party. Right? We have a labor movement that was built on the blood and sweat of workers in this country willing to sacrifice their lives for workers' rights. We have a labor movement that has dumped millions and millions of working people's money into the corporate media through television ads, through election campaigns for Democrats. And now they've elected Democrats to big majorities in both houses and the White House with commitments to pass a bill to put some teeth in a law that would make it legal to organize unions in this country. And if you could do that, and you could organize unions, and then you could organize within those unions so that they did things like unions in France do, then you might be able to talk about doing some things that it's harder to talk about without that. But what is the labor movement doing to get the Employee Free Choice Act passed? Are they doing sit-ins? Are they doing demonstrations? Are they parking trucks on Pennsylvania Avenue? No. They're going around having meetings, asking people to write friendly handwritten notes to senators saying, would you please stop screwing us if it's not too much trouble? That's what they're doing. And it doesn't inspire the progressive activist community outside of the labor movement to do a goddamn thing to help them, because they won't even stand up for themselves. Because they elected Democrats and they think that's all you have to do, and even though it's not all you had to do, they still think it's all you had to do.
Well, other than violence, I don't know how you're going to slay this dragon.
Well, I know one way you won't. Violence.
Right?
There is nothing more destructive. There's nothing that would lead to a swifter and more effective crackdown and move toward outright fascism than for progressive activists to engage in violence. There is nothing that would be more damaging and self-destructive. We have over a century of history demonstrated in this country and around the world that the most effective tools to change things in our governments are nonviolent tools. Overwhelmingly, you look at history, and these are the tools that work. Now, we aren't using them enough. We aren't using them effectively enough. We had people a couple days ago in Philadelphia, as around the country, nonviolently protesting at health insurance companies and going to jail. And, this is along the lines of a boycott. To hurt a health insurance company, one day of bad press and an hour of annoyance in their lobby is not going to do it. You need a massive, massive, enduring, years-long campaign by millions of people targeting one insurance company. You have to hurt their pocketbook. The purpose of that campaign, to involve people in the movement, to get discussions in the media that are otherwise locked out, is admirable. And the fact that they're now taking that more to Congress, who we do elect, unlike insurance company executives, is a step forward, in my opinion, in terms of strategy. But were they to go into insurance companies or Congress and use violence, you could forget about healthcare in this country for 20 years at least, and you might be able to forget about anything else worthwhile in this country.
But you just said before the labor movement used violence.
I did not say any such thing. I said they used their blood.
Well, how did they spill their blood?
They sat in. They blocked streets. I'm not going to say that in the course of our nation's history the labor movement never did use violence, but most of the violence used against the labor movement was used against it, not by it. And the effective organizing strategies that built the labor movement and that built the right to organize and the 8-hour day and the weekend were done non-violently. And it was a principled stand for nonviolence that allowed the labor movement to fight false accusations of violence. And the people who were falsely executed on false charges of violence, who won us the 8-hour day, were part of a movement that by and large was not using violence. And in later decades, in the actions that led to the civil rights movement and the sit-down strikes that built the labor movement that we had in this country 50 years ago, it was non-violence. The labor movement would never have been won violently. And it has been lost through a failure to use aggressive, insistent, uncompromising nonviolence. Yeah.
You had some meetings with congressmen and stuff. I know I remember reading. You said you actually got in, or did they try to keep you from going into those meetings? I'm trying to remember exactly.
I've spoken to lots of Congress members on lots of occasions. I don't know what meeting you're referring to.
I think it was the one you talked about Kanye. But have you seen any positive effect of working with the congressman? I mean, and are there any that we can really rely on?
I was at one time employed by a congressman named Dennis Kucinich. He listened to people who wanted Bush and Cheney impeached. He introduced articles of impeachment. He pushed for them. He whipped for them. There are other Congress members who began mentioning in offhand remarks the idea of impeaching Bush or Cheney in public events in their districts, and saw the overwhelming enthusiasm that shocked them. Who knows what rock they're living under, and took up that fight. People like Congressman Wexler, who came out of nowhere. He wasn't on the list of who we were expecting to lead a push for impeachment. Congress members can be influenced by their constituents. There's no question. What Congressman Wexler did as a member of the Judiciary Committee, publicly challenging the chair of his committee and the leader of his party to uphold an obvious constitutional demand, to my knowledge, absolutely unheard of, absolutely unique, is very rare for Congress members to publicly or even privately oppose the leaders of their party, and to publicly whip and build a petition list challenging the chairman of your committee when he's in your same party. I've never seen anybody do that. And Congressman Wexler, who's a war supporter, Israel's right-wing government first above all, no particular useful stand on most issues, but someone who's willing to aggressively fight on things, and sometimes those are the right things. He was influenced by his constituents, and he did that. And it wasn't for show, and it wasn't because he knew they would never really do it. It was an all-out effort to make them do it.
He's not a congressman.
He is a congressman.
When he's leaving.
He is leaving in 3 months. There's a downside to everything. I know that. There's an upside to everything too.
I try. I really do try. It just gets overwhelming.
Let me give you some positive information as you leave. We carry a copy of this Constitution. But let me give you an example of how you're brainwashed that you can share with others. There's 2 amendments that aren't in here. The original 13th Amendment was passed in 1810, or maybe as late as 1819. And the gist of it is that if you take a position of honor above your fellow citizens, you lose your citizenship. It was on the books for 40 years. Then some corrupt lawyers, esquires, took it off the books. Check it out on Google it. The other one, the original First Amendment, was not passed, but it failed by a close vote. The original Bill of Rights had 12 articles. The first 2 were not passed. The second one became the 27th Amendment in 1994. Now that one originally failed by a much closer vote than the original First Amendment. The original First Amendment stipulated representation at 50,000 people per representative. In 1921, Congress, the Republicans, capped representation at 435. So ever since 1921, there have been more and more people for the same number of representatives. It's now over 600,000. So those are 2 solutions. Organize to restore that level of representation. Tell people that they have no clue what democracy was meant to be by our founders. And remind them that esquires were not supposed to be running the show. That if they tried to run the show, they would lose their citizenship. So those are 2 things I can pass. Another one is use the word corporatized instead of privatized. That's another brainwashing term that's been imposed on you without your knowledge.
Well said. And if the Supreme Court rules, as they may any day, that there shall be no limits on corporations' human rights to use free speech by spending money on elections, there's going to be great cause for gloom and doom, and there's going to be a big push from coalitions of major groups that have been forming and preparing for this moment to undo that, to undo corporate personhood and money as speech. These are things that absolutely must be done. And there are some things that we're going to have to amend the Constitution if we want to do them at all. There's going to be no other way to do it other than replacing the Supreme Court with different justices. But there are lots of things that we can do much more easily. And they could throw out the filibuster tomorrow if they didn't love it so much. And all the sham and pretense and difficulty about passing bills would be gone if 51 senators tomorrow said, we don't actually like a rule that lets 41 people who represent 11% of Americans stop all legislation. But if you're going to move on to amending the Constitution, I wouldn't stop there. I would eliminate the Senate along with its filibuster, which may be the very most difficult thing to do in a constitutional amendment, but would certainly open up some office space for the enlarged House, which would better represent us. Because having somebody try to represent 700,000 people, no matter what their intentions were or how uncorrupted they were, it can't be done, and it isn't tried in most countries. So I completely agree. We need an enlarged House. But everyone's going to shout, oh, that it's already too cumbersome as it is. Where are we going to put them? How are we going to pay for them? Well, you know, the easiest answer to that is get rid of the Senate that's never done anybody any good, and enlarge the House into the Senate office buildings.